Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Robocop 2. So, really, I had a lot of fun watching this movie. I know I have seen the 2014 Robocop and I have seen the original. Now it's time to get into the sequel movies that start to get a little bit goofy, a little bit, kind of interesting of choice of villain through every part of film. Really, when going into this movie, there is a tale a little bit here of us going from first movie to second, but man, like the visuals are so like day and night when it comes from this first film to now the sequel. Like man, like the colors are a lot brighter. Like RoboCop, I think, went from like silver in the very first film to almost kind of like a almost bluish in this kind of movie. We are also to still have the commercials that are being infused in this movie, and I'm just like, are they like, I never quite understood, like, were they trying to like make this like a made for TV film, or were they trying to like make a joke about how a lot of spots tend to use a lot of commercials and stuff like in their movies to try to merchandise or sell something? So why not actually go full on and try to make a joke of TV? Maybe, I don't know. Like I don't quite get what this whole thing represents of the whole commercial thing. Like, I'm wondering if at some point we were going to see in one of these Robocop things that all of a sudden we were going to finally just say that this is some reality TV show the entire time, and that's why there was so many commercials within this. And then I could just justify and understand that I'm like, oh, okay, so we're following the life of this Murphy character, and coincidentally, he just turned into this half man, half machine. And so coincidentally, we just kept on following this character. So going into this sequel, really, this has a ton of shades of like if somebody had watched either one of these kind of films that I'm gonna like go into like comparing. Hopefully they have. This movie does kind of feel a lot like Iron Man 2. Like this movie was like the blueprint of what to come up with for Iron Man 2 because it feels very similar to a lot of that. We have a villain that is trying to copy and paste and be just like RoboCop. We have a lot of rough drafts of a RoboCop 2 that end up going haywire, that end up not working. And we also have, really in the sequel, like, it's kind of interesting where, like, if you were to have seen, like, Spider-Man 3, like, Spider-Man 3 in that sequel, like, basically crime is at an all-time low, and Spider-Man is just easily being able to go to like college classes and whatever because there's not that big hefty fear of crime anymore. Where in RoboCop 2, the entire force has gone on strike, and we have crime higher than ever, even though we have a one or an all stop cop kind of thing. We have a all 24-hour cop at the police's disposal, but that doesn't mean that crime is not going to take a day off. It is to be even seemingly worse off than it was in the original film, to where there was like a bunch of crime all going on in one time. And like the very opening of this movie, I was just kind of like, wow, this is actually like a really just kind of interesting way to open this film. Like RoboCop just doing like common crime, and then eventually we have to push on to showcase how RoboCop is eventually going to have to meet his villain in this movie. But yeah, this movie fairly reminds me of a lot of just Iron Man 2. Bizarrely, besides it just being a sequel film. Um, but I don't know, I just really, like, just visually, I was just kind of like, going throughout this film. Plus, also, we start to see where in like RoboCop 2014 how like everybody had a bajillion different decisions for RoboCop to do and have and whatever, where in the sequel movie we have people who are like doing a survey on what RoboCop should do, to the point to where RoboCop is doing any number of a million things. It gets ridiculous. And then it just forces RoboCop to eventually just shut down, just because of how, even more so in the first movie. In this, the sequel film, they tried to push uh, down Murphy's throat even much more so in the sequel, that you are not a human, you are a robot. Realize that. Realize that you are just a program, not a living spirit of a person. And so eventually, when RoboCop is to eventually be uh, put back in society at some point in this film, we have him doing all kinds of number of things that really isn't helping him solve a case. And we have RoboCop, who is eventually just malfunctioning in this movie. But we are also to really try to have RoboCop really meet his match in this movie. Where, as in the first one, we just have RoboCop versus man. Where in this sequel, we very much have much more machine versus machine, and that kind of tells you like where these movies are bound to happen. Where it either has to become like a robot versus army, or a robot versus a larger robot, or more complicated robot, or whichever, to really just kind of put RoboCop in his place. Um, Here's the thing about this sequel movie. I think there was a lot more story things going on in the first film. This film just tries to do some goofy things with RoboCop. I think it really just tries to make it seem like, well, man can still take out machine, and so RoboCop now has to like bounce back and figure out the best way how to come back at this. But yeah, so really, I kind of miss the story in this movie. Like, the story didn't feel good enough compared to the first one. It just was like, this movie was like, hey, look at all the cool stuff we can do. And like, yeah, like the visuals of this movie was really cool, but that's all it had going for it. It didn't have a good enough story in the sequel, in all honesty. But eventually, we are probably going to get into RoboCop 3, hopefully at some point, if people are interested. Hopefully, I will get into RoboCop 3 at some point. Because more than likely, people might just be interested in just one kind of RoboCop film, because eventually they might be like, yeah, these tend to get goofy at some point. Or really, if people are interested, I could probably go into the RoboCop series, the show, or the animated series, with a number of those coming at you. So, with that said, let's get into spoilers about this movie, so that way we can go out of our way to say that we've seen it. So, going to the very beginning of this film, we have a guy who is pulling off commercial. His name is John Glover. I'm like, yeah, John Glover. Of course, if you guys know him, he's from Smallville, Gremlins, and immediately once I saw him, I was like really jazzed. And so we have John Glover's character, who is selling a thing called Magnavolt. It seems that there is some hoodlum that is going to somebody's car trying to steal this person's car, and so all of a sudden this kind of like this rope like cage thing like goes around locking this guy into place, electrifies him, and shoves him out of this car. And we have, of course, this Magnavolt salesman who's like, yeah, like, be sure that your car is safe with Magnavolt. And so that's really just the goofy commercial. We eventually have somewhere in this movie later a Sunblock commercial where this girl is to pour on, like, Sunblock 5000, where her, like, skin is, like, green and blue and goofy looking, but it looks hilarious. So, but let's get on to the nitty gritty here. Uh, so we are to have Robocop that is trying to be Murphy again. So much so that he is consistently parking himself in front of his wife's home, watching her do her day-to-day things. And that is to happen so much so that two men are to walk in, Delaney and Holtzgang, to remind Robocop that he is a machine, not a man. And he needs to stop going back to old to old spots that do not want him anymore. We have Robocop, who is to eventually, as Murphy, remember some scene where his wife is to get out of the shower and kiss him. And so we have that memory kind of somewhere in place into Robocop. And so we eventually have Ellen Murphy, who is going to this police department to see where Robocop is, and to have Ellen Murphy ask Robocop, well, do you remember me? Do you know who I am? And so we have Robocop going close to the fence, and Robocop is telling Ellen, touch my skin through the fence. She does, and so we have Robocop who is saying, like, your husband is dead. Like, this is just an echo of what was your husband. And, like, they put this together to honor him, but your husband is dead. So we have Ellen running off, teary-eyed and all kinds of jazz. Here's the thing. I skipped the very beginning of this film because I think that part is more important. So let's back. So we have anarchy just ensuing in the parts of this city. The news bulletin is breaking in to tell you that there's this brand new drug out there called Nuke. Thank God that they had to give you the name of this drug so you know where to shop for it. So, we bizarrely have narcotics in this movie. We now have a specific drug for this film. I don't know why, but we do. So, because Frank Miller wrote this thing, and he wrote the screenplay for it, and good for him, because if also, like, Frank Miller is also in this movie as the chemist for Kane, so thumbs up for that. So we have Frank Miller actually in this movie, like he was actually in the movie The Spirit, which I think he wrote for that as well. Or he was the person that created The Spirit, and so Frank Miller is a famous comic book artist. A lot of people will probably know him from his Daredevil stuff, or even the Dark Knight Returns comic book that Frank Miller is known for. If you don't know who Frank Miller is, then that's sad because you probably don't know much about comic books, and that's perfectly fine. So so we have this news bulletin telling you about Nuke and telling you about how like this world is now and how it's gone in the crapper. To where we have a mentioning about the police officers being on strike and that they need more money and all kinds of things because they're putting their life on the line. And like they're kind of telling you an overall like scale of everything of what everybody's trying to do. Of course, OCP is putting together a Robocop 2 thing going on, and eventually we are going to see eventually some rough drafts of that, which will be pretty cool to see all those rough drafts. I like the Robocop 2 rough drafts, just like I liked the Iron Man 2 rough drafts of Iron Man. It was kind of cool. So we have just anarchy ensuing in this town. We have two women trying to desperately get to some drugs. We have people who are breaking into a gun store, stealing bazookas, shooting guys, and just like naturally assuming there is no law. Eventually, we have this guy who is to gather his bazooka on the hood of his car to eventually see a police car who is driving by with his sirens on. And so we have these guys are like, dude, I'm gonna have fun with this police car. And so we have like bazookas and rockets and all kinds of jazz being shot into this police car. And so, like, this car is rolling over, this car is doing all kinds of things. But we still have Robocop making his way out of this car. Even when it's bursting into flame, Robocop is just walking out of his car like it's nobody's business. That car was crushed, but Robocop just like, yeah, dead or alive, you're coming with me. Like, this is just the same old song and dance that I've had every single day of my life. So let's go. So we have Robocop, who is to, of course, take down every single one of these thugs. Because also you can't exactly arrest these people, because how are you going to arrest them? You're the only cop on the block and your car is destroyed. So we have Robocop with the classic catchphrases and throughout this movie as well as per usual. So we are to eventually just push on for this movie. So we are to eventually see the rough drafts of Robocop 2. Because really, if anything, they need to figure out how to make another Robocop right now, because the police force is on a strike. Ed 209 is still heavily malfunctioning. They had showcased that on the news broadcast, that like, hey, they're still shoving out Ed 209 out there, but there have been numerous problems with this character, and so we are to just consistently see that this Ed 209 is still just a crap fest. From the original movie, that they try to like sell this guy and it still doesn't work. But that mess is what it is. Eventually, I guess he'll become a real viable option sometime in the distant future. Maybe in 2014, when eventually they'll perfect Ed 209 and he'll actually not be a butt of a joke. So we have some rough drafts that are being put together of Robocop 2, because if anything, you really have to try to put the title somewhere in the movie, and surefire enough, they are trying to do that. So we have Juliet Fox, who is trying to desperately come up with a Robocop 2, and so we are to have one one Robocop go out there, and he has a like a TV screen for a face, and this thing easily just starts to just malfunction and just die. We also have another robot come out, and this robot takes his helmet and basically just rips off his face to show that there's just a skeleton in there, and he just keels over and dies. Showcasing that, like, yeah, every single one of these Robocops that they try to put together, they are so they're so attached to their humanity that eventually they kill themselves uh, because they can't let their humanity go, and then they realize how much of a monster that they are. Kind of like in Robocop 2014, where that Murphy is to tell Gary Oldman's character that they need to pull the plug. Like, tell his wife and his son that they tried, but there's nothing they could do. So they mention how the reason why Robocop works was just his will to want to his will for justice, uh, his will to seek revenge, kind of kept him to be able to stay alive long enough to perfectly put together this whole Robocop machine. Um, that's why it all worked before. Like, all these people were just volunteers that were forced into this thing. That's why it didn't work. So we push on to have Robocop, who is to eventually go in to the police department to. Oh my God! Come on. Eh, there we go. And so we are to see a guy who is named Duffy. Duffy is to try to tease a bunch of these criminals with Nuke, and then we end up finding out that Duffy actually is teasing these criminals with Nuke because then he is going to go off to the side to take some Nuke himself. To where we are to find out that Duffy is actually dirty and Duffy is actually working for Kane. And so we have Duffy being the informant for Kane. And so we have really Kane squeezing information out of Duffy, squeezing any kind of figuring outs of what these people are to do next. And so we have eventually in this film that we have Robocop, who is to eventually go and try to seek out Kane to eventually try and take him down, and he ends up finding out that Duffy is the squealer. He's the bad cop. Both Murphy and Anne or Lewis both are taking a stakeout to try to find out more about Kane, and eventually they find out that Duffy is a dirty cop. So RoboCop is to go after Duffy and to try and squeeze him for information, and we have Kane and all of his cohorts. I think Angie and Hobb, who are to eventually scramble and get out of there. So, at least I'm hoping that's who it is. I could be wrong because it doesn't show the picture of one character. But anyways, so we are to have Duffy squeal and mention that there is a factory that Kane is to be held up in, where he is to, I guess, manufacture this whole nuke uh, lab. There's like a lab within this factory, and eventually this lab is in some truck container that, like, I guess if anything is to go horribly awry, this lab could easily go mobile at any moment. So we have RoboCop getting that information, and so RoboCop is driving his way to this environment where Kane is to be held. Kane is going through and showcasing to us. It seems like they are starting to put a lot of different kinds of drugs out there. There's different kind of color combinations. It seems like they are putting out a new blue kind of drug. And so we have Kane, who is to test this drug, and it is to not work properly. And so we have Kane, who grabs Frank, who is Frank Miller, and tells him, it's like, well, hey man, like, this isn't like working. Like, make sure that you put less of this and more of that, because like I'm kind of going a little blind here. Or he's having problems seeing, or something along those lines. So pushing on. So we have RoboCop, who is to make his way through this facility, and we have Kane, who is actually prepared for RoboCop to come here. We have RoboCop, who comes in and, of course, starts taking some kind of low-level goons down. But then we eventually have RoboCop making his way further into this factory, and it seems like these guys have some huge, heavy equipment to where one gun is to completely shoot off RoboCop's hand. One electric weapon is to hit RoboCop in the chest and electrify him and to take him down, so much so that he can no longer move. He is basically paralyzed. So we have Kane, who is telling RoboCop, you know the thing that took you down? Nuke. These drugs. That's what took you down. Like, it wasn't me, it was Nuke. We also have Kane, who is comparing himself to Jesus. That at some point people had came for him and thought that he was a criminal, but he wasn't. He was a savior. And so we have Kane, who is just hitting on RoboCop, and Hobbs is telling him, hey, don't stop. Like, I want to make sure that you, like, we really find out if he has a heart in there or not. And Kane is like, well, I'm kind of getting tired. So we just start having them start to lob off parts of RoboCop. They just start sawing off pieces of the man to where we are to eventually have RoboCop being chucked back into police headquarters, and they're desperately trying to figure out how to put his pieces together. And we have the doctor who is mentioning to these people that it's like, hey, like, he's in agony right now, and like, we need to try to figure out how to fix this, because really, like, the other people, like the Holtz gang and the Delaney, are just thinking like, hey, he's fine, like, he's a machine, like, if anything, like, I'm sure, like, we can just shut him off and he'll be fine. Where this doctor is mentioning, no, like, he's in agony, he's in pain right now. And so we eventually have RoboCop, who is put on the shelf for them to really push even more so that they need to definitely get a RoboCop 2 together. Scrambling to try to find the right candidate to be able to take down Kane. So we have Robocop when being put together. We have him have a ton of different programs, and we have Robocop who is now forced to do any number of things that people want him to do besides his just normal everyday job. We have a bunch of people that are telling these surveyors, hey, you know what? Like, I would actually like to see RoboCop go to some kind of like campus or school or somewhere and just like talk to kids and like tell them to don't do drugs and like all these kind of these kind of goofy like spokesman kind of things that they're trying to make him do, where they're trying to like change his attitude and change the way he presents himself to people, and like try to be much more having a commercial like appeal to everyone. And so we have Murphy, once he actually is being put back together, he is severely malfunctioning to where when Murphy and Lewis are to go out to eventually take down some thugs, we have RoboCop who is reading a Miranda rights to a dead person, and we have Lewis who has to remind him of that, and RoboCop is like, well, I think I'm having some problems. Like, I think I think there's something wrong here. So RoboCop, instead of going after the thugs, RoboCop is speaking to the youth that is in this environment, and like kind of mentioning some bits and pieces here and there, like don't smoke, kids, or don't do nuke, or do whatever. Like, and eventually we have RoboCop who is to see a man who is smoking off to the side of the road, and RoboCop is to shoot up this brick wall around the spot where this guy is smoking. This guy stops smoking, and so RoboCop is like, thank you for stop smoking. Like, so RoboCop is gonna start just shooting people like for smoking? You've got to be kidding me. But I guess RoboCop 2, one of the rough drafts, just killed all the scientists when eventually he came out immediately. So we have obviously RoboCop who is having a number of side effects here. And so the one good thing that does happen at this point is we do eventually have RoboCop who is to obtain Kane. So we have Kane who is driving off with a ton of money in hand in this armored car. And so we have RoboCop who had tried to attach himself onto this giant truck, but eventually at some point RoboCop gets hit with a sign and eventually has to figure out a new way to get to Kane. So eventually RoboCop gets a motorcycle from somebody, and like I'm like, yeah, this is really awesome. Like, obviously I think RoboCop honestly is better suited to a motorcycle than an actual car. I never really understood that, especially in these early things. When it came to the RoboCop 2014, they put him in a motorcycle. I'm like, yeah, like that seems a lot better. Like, I think really having RoboCop probably in the motorcycle was probably a very a cumbersome thing to have him do. And so, and plus also they probably were like, let's have him be like a stunt double for most of this. So we have RoboCop who eventually drives in front of Kane with this motorcycle. And so now both RoboCop and Kane are to play chicken. And so RoboCop is to drive this motorcycle to eventually jump out of this motorcycle into the windshield of Kane's car and take Kane down. And so we have we now have Juliet Fox, who is seeing this Kane guy, and she's like, well, you know what? This guy is probably going to head to death row. More than likely, he might actually be a pretty decent candidate to... I'm going to pause here for a second. I'm going to reset for a second. All right. So we have Juliet Fox Fax that is going to the hospital wing where Kane is at, and she is to pull all the cords and turn everything off that is keeping Kane alive, because Juliet Fax is trying to confirm to everyone that Kane is going to be this new test subject, because obviously the will of getting at Robocop for Kane probably has to be so strong that that is the reason why Kane could quite possibly be the perfect candidate for Robocop 2. Instead of the fact that this person is the best candidate to be like a law-abiding citizen, whatever. No, it's just the fact that like this girl just wants to put some man in a can to prove that this whole Robocop 2 thing works. Whether it goes haywire or not, but Juliet Fax is also knowing a way to also manipulate Kane to do what she wants him to do. So that works. So we have Kane killed off to be having his brain be shoved into this robot, and so this robot seems to work perfectly well. So we have Juliet Fax, who is to tempt Robocop 2, aka Kane, with a huge amount of nuke. And so Kane is opening up his hatch to eventually retrieve the nuke, but we have Fax is like, well, not just yet. If anything, like, you're gonna have to earn this. And so we have Kane, aka Robocop 2. Let's call it Robocop 2. It'll be easier, even though it isn't. We have Robocop 2, who is to go after his previous associates. So we find out that there is a couple of city officials that seem to be low on funds. $50,000 or around $50,000 worth of funds that they are behind on. And so we have the mayor, who is to go to the biggest drug lord, who I guess is now Hobb, Kane's kid, and really just try to kind of make a deal with him. And so while that is going on, we are to have Kane burst into this spot and kill everyone in sight. No matter who they are, he's killing everyone. And so we eventually start to see some people hiding, sneaking away. We have the mayor who ends up going and dropping himself into a sewer to slide out of this headquarters into a thing of water. And we have Hobb, who is to see Kane and like start to like kind of assess where Kane is going. Kane is to go to his former woman and Kane's former woman is looking and seeing that Kane is to showcase himself on some screen, and so we have this girl who is kind of just also manipulated by Nuke, which is obvious by Hobbs holding off a Nuke from this woman. But we have her also mentioning to Kane, like, well, hey, like, maybe we can just make this work. And so we have her starting to touch on him and start to, like, go, maybe this will work out. Sadly, Kane just, I guess, starts to get in anger, realizing that he's not going to be able to live the same life that he had lived. And so he just grabs this girl's head, crushes it, and just, like, bashes the crap out of it. And so then he just moves on. So we eventually have Kane spot Hobb, who is kind of just waiting against this armored car, and so we have one armored guy who is to start to shoot up Robocop, and it doesn't really do much of damage, but Robocop kills that guy off to give Hobbs time to hide out in this armored car. Sadly enough, though, Robocop 2, or Kane, shoots up the armored car to have Hobb die off. And so we eventually have Robocop 1, who is to make his way to this spot, and eventually he sadly comes way too late. Everyone is dead. Kane eventually is to leave, and because we have Robocop who tries to like take down Kane and try to get him away from this, and he runs off. So we have Robocop who is to see Hobb, and Hobb is to take the hold of Robocop, and is to mention, like, how dying sucks, and that Robocop should know that. And Robocop is going to say, well, like, I'm going to go and, like, want to get you some help, but Hobbs realizes it's going to be too late for him. And so we have Hobbs who's desperately asking Robocop to just comfort him as he dies, and he does. So we are to just continue to just push on with this film. So after this moment, we are to realize that Kane is just going to be the villain of this movie. There is no fixing this Robocop 2 to have him be just like the original. It's impossible. So Kane is to go off to have this whole huge procedure being done with this guy called the Old Man, who seems to own all the stocks of OCP. And so we have this presentation being done of Kane, and we are to have Kane being presented to all the public. And so we have the Old Man who is to present to everyone the drug called Nuke in its biggest form. And so the Old Man is to mention to everybody, like, yeah, this is the drug that is ruling over our streets. And, like, I'm hoping that this Robocop 2 will abolish all of that. And so we have Robocop 2 who is, like, smashing through some of these buildings, Godzilla style, to make it over to the Old Man and to try to retrieve the nuke drug. Because Kane was promised to get this nuke drug, but these people did not want to deliver. So we have Juliet Fax, who is trying to control Kane and try to hit buttons to turn him off. And so Kane is to take that remote and basically just nerf this remote and crush it. And so we have Robocop who is going into this conference procedure, whichever it is, and shoot Kane, and Kane is to fire back. To where we have the old man yelling out, "Behave yourselves!" Which is probably the best line out of this whole entire movie. Behave yourselves! And so we have Kane, who is now chasing after Robocop. Robocop is going into this elevator to get on top of the elevator to get into the top part of the elevator, and Robocop 2 is to follow him, and so Robocop is to go and cut the like the rope or whichever of this elevator to have him go shooting up, to where we have Robocop 2 who is still gaining on Robocop because he is to take his arms and just kind of press against this wall and eventually as speedingly as possible just kind of like dog style like kind of just like spin his way up to the very top of this elevator, to where eventually now Robocop is grabbing the legs of Robocop 2 and eventually holding off to the side of this roof. And so we have Robocop that is trying to push Kane off of this edge, and like he is trying to muscle him off of this rooftop. And so we have both Robocop and Kane falling through the streets into this sewer-like location, to where at first they are to fight it out, but then eventually we are to have them make it to the streets to continue on this fighting. So we have Kane and Robocop, like they're fighting it out in the streets. We have the police force that is also trying to help Robocop, which is a meaningless thing because a lot of them are starting to get shot up. We have at one point when Robocop and Kane are in the building, we have Lewis and all the police being called, and Lewis is mentioning like, well, hey, like what? Why are we all here for? And one of the police officers is to mention, it's like, yeah, like there must be a war going on in there because like we were called for all kinds of things. So we eventually have them having a very hard time figuring out how to take out Kane. Like they're like trying to use any number of things, but it all just doesn't work. So eventually Lewis is to find this this battering ram like vehicle, and like in the very first Die Hard movie where like the SWAT team had this special car to ram into that building, and eventually the building ends up just getting like bazookaed out, and the quarterback is toast. And then like, so we have Lewis who is to get that same vehicle and ram Kane, and that really does take Kane out for a pretty good amount of time. And so everybody is scrambling the heck out of there. Like all the people are just running off to eventually just be like, oh, thank God, like maybe the police have Kane, like maybe he's taken care of. But Kane is to eventually just push off this vehicle to eventually come back out to still just continue his onslaught. And so we have eventually Robocop, who's eventually waiting on top of this vehicle, kind of like setting up to eventually jump on to Kane, to eventually start ripping things out of the back of his neck. And we eventually have Robocop, who is to rip out Kane's brain and to smash it onto the streets, and that is to kill Kane off completely, showcasing that Robocop is still number one and there's never going to be another that is going to replace him. Some things are going to try, but really they're going to do a horrible job at that. So we eventually have the old man who's thinking, who should I blame for this? Because I want to try to avoid prison time. So who am I going to have to try to blame for this? Because we have the mayor who is like trying to like smear the old man of the OCP and try to say like, hey, like Kane was a killer and these people knew that, and like they put this guy out there knowing full well that he was just going to murder and kill people. Like, we need to like get these like get this old man like out of the way because this guy is not doing the right thing for OCP. And it's like, well, the old man like bought like a bulk of the shares, so what are you gonna have him do? So we have the old man who is to start to think between two other guys who exactly that they could blame on this. And so they immediately just say, well, Juliet Fax was the girl who put the brain in that thing. And so the old man is like, you know what? I like what you're thinking. Like, yeah, yeah. And so we all of a sudden have Juliet Fax who is going and consoling the old man, going, I didn't think any of this was going to happen. And the old man is like, well, yeah, like, hey, like, things go wrong all the time. And so we immediately have the old man who is going to one of his brainstormers and mention, like, yeah, that thing that you were putting together, get working on it right away. Because, yeah, Fax is gonna go to prison for a fairly long time. So we have the old man driving off, and we have Lewis who is talking to Robocop, and she's like, are you really surprised that, like, the old man is going to completely get away with this? And Robocop is like, dude, I've seen it, all kinds of things. It's like, you know what? Like, maybe he'll get connected somehow. Maybe, like, the old man will just lose his bat crap craziness and will just have to get killed at some point. Or probably just have to just all of a sudden just lose his effing mind, and he'll have to get sent to jail like anyone else. Because Robocop 3 or 4, or whichever frickin' goofy movie that has that guy just lose his frickin' mind. But we'll get to that somewhere down the road. I want to get out of here, so I'm going to say goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.